Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Inside Florida Politics podcast powered by the USA Today Florida Network. So, hey, Jimmy Kimmel back at work and back on television. But what about those Florida professors also suspended because they dared to speak out after the assassination of Charlie Kirk? Will Florida boost the GOP's chances of retaining the U.S. House majority next year? And the year after Hurricane Helene viciously hit the Sunshine State, do we now have a legion of forgotten Floridians too? I'm Antonio Fins, your host, and these are the topics I will be discussing on this episode with my USA Today Florida colleagues, Stephany Matat, John Kennedy, and Anna Goni-Lessan. All right, well, you know what? It's a good thing we now have Stephany Matat as our First Amendment reporter because First Amendment issues have really surged to the forefront in the wake of the September 10th assassination of Charlie Kirk. So free speech right now doesn't seem to be so free. I mean, where do we begin? We have the Walt Disney Company broiled again under the hot lamp of politics after it suspended its star late-night host, Jimmy Kimmel. This time, though, Disney took incoming fire not just from the MAGA right, but also from the left as loyal Mouseketeer types canceled Disney Plus and Hulu subscriptions. Disney unsuspended Kimmel on September 23rd, but now the question is, what about everybody else that's been impacted by this? This week, for example, Florida Atlantic University confirmed that it had suspended 3 professors due to comments they made related to Kirk. And what about the state's opinion patrols that are out there looking to see what teachers are posting or saying? Free speech in the state seems far from protected. So, Stephany, you've been writing about the assassination of Charlie Kirk and how it resulted in a testing of free speech boundaries. Tell us, is Florida passing the stress test here?
Well, you're certainly right. I don't even know where to get started here. But, free speech has been kind of taking over this national spotlight just over the last few months, but especially in these recent weeks following the assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. So just after the assassination, Florida officials, expressed their grief. But across the nation as well, we were also seeing, following a frenzy of firings and disciplinary actions to employees over social media posts that, well, some found offensive. Some Florida officials accused teachers, professors, public employees, nurses, and professions all over of celebrating Kirk's death. And well, these firings, as you said, they were testing free speech boundaries. They prompted this type of free speech discussion, one being whether public employees like teachers have First Amendment freedoms and what limitations are for it. But it also prompted a discussion of whether hate speech is considered to be is protected under the First Amendment in the first place. I mean, even some Trump administration leaders who started out in Florida weighed in, like Attorney General Pam Bondi, who said that hate speech that crosses a line into threats of violence isn't protected. But on the contrary, a national free speech group, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, they said that while she's correct that speech satisfying this strict standard for what constitutes a true threat of violence is not protected, well, at the same time, the group explained that doesn't necessarily equate hate speech, and that's a whole separate thing. And another thing is that, hate speech is not a form of speech ruled out in the First Amendment. Speech is all over the place with just that one circumstance where we're talking about hate speech, about free speech protections, about public employees, about disciplinary actions. But that's not all that we've seen in recent weeks.
Let's unpack a little bit here, because one thing is, it's different when a private corporation or a business out there decides that it's going to discipline an employee for something they said that the company feels damaged its reputation or somehow damaged its standing with customers. That's one thing, but I think what a lot of people are really uneasy about, and even on the right, with people on the conservative right have said, hold up a second, because what's really a little different here is that it's the government going in to say, determining what is hate speech, what is free speech, rather than the marketplace and society in general. How has that debate played out here? The idea that it's the government now patrolling us and deciding who's crossed the line.
Well, that's exactly, that's exactly a great point there, because, well, as we've been seeing that Florida education officials, the cabinet member like Attorney General James Uthmire, even Governor Ron DeSantis, they have gone out and spoken against people who they say have been celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. You made an interesting point about private and public employees there. Whenever I have spoken to First Amendment experts, they've explained to me that a lot of this debate of what we're seeing with how the government is responding is honestly going to be played out in courts or played out in lawsuits as they rise up. Inevitably, these types of things are going to rise up in court, and it may even test out more and clarify more about the bounds of free speech relating to employment. Employment attorneys that I've spoke to have explained to me that when you are a private employee, you don't necessarily retain as much First Amendment rights, but as a public employee, you do in some capacities. Well, that's going to play out heavily in the courts on determining, well, how exactly are they going to do it? And what matters here specifically is the content of this speech. What exactly are they saying? In what capacity? Are they a teacher? Are they a nurse? Are they working in some sort of government agency? All of these factors are very, very different, which is why every case is going to be kind of case by case basis. But the response has been quite split. We've seen people who have said that this type of offensive comments coming from, let's say, a teacher, well, that can be concerning for a student who may not feel welcome in that classroom. But then others are saying that, well, at the same time, so it depends entirely on what they're saying. Some people who are just speaking about Charlie Kirk and about their opposition of his views, well, that's protected speech. Whereas when it crosses into that strict standard of violence, that's something else, which is ultimately something that's to play out.
Okay. No, right. Yeah. Okay. But so, and I thought what you said about bonding is also really interesting, because we're talking about hate speech. But how does the government regulate hate speech when the president himself says he hates his opponents? And I recall some years back when it was the Democrats in power, and you had social media platforms, quote unquote, canceling people because things that they had put on their website, on those platforms, they determined were hate or insightful or somehow inappropriate. And again, that's a private entity making a decision, not the government. But you had people in the MAGA movement who are now talking about patrolling and policing speech that they think it's hateful, when 3 or 4 years ago, they were saying it should be far more flexible and open and far more lenient and tolerant. So it strikes me that this is kind of, depends which side of the hate speech you're on.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point there, is that nowadays, in recent weeks, it's not just with the frenzy of firings, but even with this separate issue involving late night television hosts, such as Jimmy Kimmel, who was under scrutiny for comments he made on his show following Kirk's assassination. Well, free speech experts and advocates are saying that all of these matters in recent weeks are especially concerning because of the escalation in government officials in stifling or chilling free speech since Kirk's assassination. Especially nowadays, like just earlier this week, Attorney General Uthmire launched a portal as a way for people in Florida to report that violent speech and reference social media comments following Kirk's assassination. But like you pointed out, well, what's that standard? Well, First Amendment experts say there's a really strict standard in determining whether speech is considered to be violent. And Uthmire didn't really clarify how these specific comments would be flagged to law enforcement. Because in order to meet a threat of violence that is not protected by the First Amendment, it needs to be a true, imminent threat. Just like you were saying with Attorney General Pam Bondi's comments, that's where experts have really, really been weighing in here and saying, hey, well, hate speech, that not is protected by the First Amendment. If something makes you feel hurt or uncomfortable, well, that's protected by the First Amendment. Which is why the courts are really going to be the biggest thing here when you see these cases go case by case.
All right. Well, I think, even though, like we said earlier, Kimmel's back on the air, you still have these FAU professors suspended. You still have a lot of other issues out there, people that feel that their rights have been trodden on. I don't think this issue is going to go away anytime soon. Nonetheless, John, let's move on to 2026. Hey, look, we're still more than a year away, or roughly a year away from the first mail-in votes and the early votes in the 2026 midterm election contest. But if Florida and other red states have their way, the fight for control of the U.S. House of Representatives might be over before it even begins. That's because congressional district lines may get redrawn here and elsewhere in a way that assures that the GOP will win enough seats to keep control of the chamber. In fact, in Florida, the much-followed Cook Political Report said that districts could be redrawn in a way that guarantees Republicans pick up between 3 and 5 seats in Florida alone. Now, Governor Ron DeSantis already pulled something off like this a couple of years ago in the congressional district formerly represented by Democrat Al Lawson, and that resulted in the former Democratic stronghold yielding 2 GOP seats. Tell us, John, where is DeSantis looking, and can he get it past the courts?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. You're right. It was only 3 years ago that the legislature was tasked with redrawing congressional and legislative districts. DeSantis then, as you pointed out, vetoed the congressional plan that the legislature came up with, and the governor basically drew his own map. And that overturned a North Florida district that had been represented by a Black Democrat for 30 years. And it scattered thousands of Black Democratic voters into districts where they're now represented by white Republicans. From a national view, Florida's congressional map allowed Republicans to win an additional 4 seats from Florida, and that gave them a 20-8 advantage among the state's 28 congressional seats, and that's where we are today. It's a sizable, partisan imbalance in Florida. But that's not enough. Trump is demanding that Republican-leaning states come up with more seats for him, even if it involves some trickeration. Florida has a constitutional amendment approved by voters in 2010 that prohibits drawing district lines to help a political party, but Florida Republicans are going to come up with a way around that. Florida under DeSantis has never let either the law or the voters stand in the way of doing something that he thinks may elevate his profile among hard right Republicans. And, remember, he still envisions himself in the White House someday. So with a midterm election next year, when the president's party historically loses seats, Trump is demanding that Republican-leaning states redraw their congressional maps again to carve up Democratic seats and help him build up the GOP's wafer-thin majority in the House. They don't want to lose that majority. That is always a risk for an unpopular president. Texas and Missouri, conservative states, they've already redrawn their boundaries, given Republicans the potential to win 6 more seats, I should say, at the expense of incumbent Democrats. And now DeSantis and the House Speaker, Daniel Perez, are really ready to push Florida into another round of redistricting in January. That's when the legislative session starts, and that's when this topic is going to be on the agenda. Perez was recently pushed by Trump to run for state attorney general next year, and he's all in on redistricting. The first House committee work on this redistricting may occur as early as next month. But Trump may settle for something less. There's already talk of, as you pointed out with the Cook report, that as many as 5 Democratic-held seats in Florida could be carved up. Trump may be willing to go along with maybe 1 or 2 more out of Florida. But the DeSantis crowd is hoping to really practically obliterate the Democratic representation in Congress from Florida, giving him more talking points as he prepares for another run for the presidency in 3 years. But probably the Democrats most at risk right now are Jared Moskowitz from Broward, who actually once worked for DeSantis, and then maybe Central Florida's Darren Soto and Kathy Castor from the Tampa Bay area. In Florida, redistricting to openly favor a party, as I pointed out, is outlawed by the state's voter-approved fair districts amendments. But there is an effort by Republicans to have fair districts overturned as violating the federal Constitution's Equal Protection Clause, because fair districts prohibit drawing district lines that diminish the power of minorities from electing a candidate of their choice. Some of that argument played into the point that led to the unseating of Al Lawson, Antonio, as you pointed out earlier, in the last round of redistricting. Florida Supreme Court has 7 members, 5 of whom are appointed by DeSantis. Right. So their legal reasoning often reflects what DeSantis wants.
Well, let's talk about the legal reasoning, because usually when you get these battles over redistricting and redrawing boundaries is at the end of a decennial census where you have new numbers. Right. So then you draw boundaries. So we're not doing it this time. This time we're doing it because the president wants the lines redrawn to make sure that the House remains in Republican hands. Now, I can't imagine that Florida Republicans and the governor will go to the courts and make that argument. So what will be the reasoning, do you think?
Yeah, basically, there's no new data. That's the thing that a census gives you. Census shows population shifts that have occurred over a decade. In this case, we're talking 3 years, and the population hasn't shifted that much, and we certainly don't have the data to support it. Republicans, though, may raise the question of whether Florida's current congressional map, the one that DeSantis pushed on the legislature, that map may be in violation of the U.S. Supreme Court. That's going to be the purported reason that the Republicans are using to redraw congressional boundaries. Again, getting back at that equal protection question. And in this case, they'll likely begin by trying to fix a South Florida Democratic district now held by Representative Sheila Cherfilis McCormick, which includes close to a majority of Black voters. The argument will be that this Black access district, as it's known, may violate constitutional equal protection standards. And this is how carving up Cherfilis McCormick's district may help the GOP. Redistricting really treats the state as a mosaic. So if Republicans retool Cherfilis McCormick's district, they'll start to scatter some of her Black voters into adjacent districts and maybe add more white Republican voters to make it a little less Black access. This relocating of voters will work its way up from South Florida into neighboring districts, into places like North Broward, where Moskowitz district could suddenly become more Republican leaning. A similar dynamic could work its way into Central Florida, affecting Soto's district, or Tampa Bay, where Castor's district also could become more competitive for a Republican. Now, especially in Tampa, making Castor's district more Republican could make the surrounding Republican districts, well, a little less Republican. And that raises the possibility that some districts could be created where Democrats may actually have a chance of knocking off a Republican incumbent. So there's a risk involved here for Florida Republicans. In their effort to gerrymander more Republicans, they want to avoid what analysts call a dummy mander, where your map making actually hurts your own party. Right. So there's a little bit of what's ahead for the legislature, this kind of dynamic. Plus, you have a lot of legal components with whether the fair districts will prohibit this kind of political gerrymandering. That's going to be something for courts later to probably decide. But we're seeing a familiar theme. Trump wants something, Republicans jump to give it to him. DeSantis sees a chance to do something that will get him attention and improve his standing as a Republican leader and maybe a White House contender again. And then you have Daniel Perez, the speaker. He seems he's got a chance here to thank the man who looks like he's endorsing him for a cabinet post and a political future. And also in keeping with familiar theme, there's another truism. In DeSantis's Florida, the law, the will of the voters, and especially the influence of minorities really can be steamrollered by the Republican majority when all is said and done.
Wow. Well, I should tell our readers that generally speaking, the legislative sessions take place in March in odd numbered years, but given the even numbered years in the elections, that they start really in January. So all of this is going to come to some sort of decision fairly soon in the next few months. So keep an eye out because the congressional district that you've been a part of for some time, it may change.
Yeah.
So want to move on here to Anna. Hey, so Hurricane Helene, it was a year ago actually to this date, as we talk here, September 25th, that Hurricane Helene hit the Big Bend area. And it's interesting, Anna, because one of the themes in last year's presidential election was the forgotten Americans. It echoed this Trumpian MAGA theme of government neglect of people in the American heartland, from East Palestine, Pennsylvania, where a train wreck upended lives, to Lahaina, Hawaii, where terrible wildfires wiped out a town and left its residents in despair. It was a theme also in North Carolina, which was also impacted by Helene, where the Biden administration was accused by now President Trump of leaving the victims of the hurricane stranded. But actually, Helene struck Florida first, as I said, a year ago today. In your reporting, Anna, though, it looks like the state and our insurance industry has left some people in the Big Bend area stranded and perhaps forgotten Floridians. Why is that? What's going on? What did you find?
Yeah, so what I found was people still trying to build their lives back. Some of the houses look exactly the same a year later, which is kind of bonkers.
When you say
Some
exactly the
houses,
same, like the damage is still.
yeah, the damage is the same. So, like, you have houses that don't have the facade, right? You can look straight into the kitchen and see, the cabinets, and the back door is gone, and you have, but then you have other houses that have built back that are really tall, and those really thick concrete pilings, and are now being built to code. So it's kind of eerie. It's like every third house is gone. It's either it was wiped away by the storm, or it was torn down because it was just destroyed. But there are a couple people who are still there, who have decided to stay, and have started to rely on each other because they want to stay. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not struggling, right? They're trying to open back up their businesses. They're trying to get people to come back and rent their rental properties. They're trying to get people to come and fish and scallop and things like that. But it's proven difficult because, I mean, you can't ignore that when one out of every three houses is gone. I think the Taylor County property appraiser, the updated numbers is over 350 houses were lost. That's a lot. That's a lot of people's lives, their belongings, their things, their everything, right? So
And it seems like the people have been caught in that trap of flood insurance versus
oh yeah,
windstorm insurance, and where the insurance company says, "Yeah, I'm sorry that you lost your house, but it was really the flood, not the wind, so therefore you're not insured." And of course, I think the number in Florida is only like 1 in 5 Floridians actually has flood insurance. So in that case, if you're caught in that trap, you really don't have anywhere to go. Have you seen a lot of that?
yeah. I heard from multiple people about how the insurance companies are paying out for flood, but they're not paying out for wind, and they're not calling Hurricane Helene a wind event, which it was a Category 4. Those are some pretty strong winds. They are currently in a conversation, let's put it that way, with lawyers and with their insurance companies, right? It's I don't know. I feel like this is the battle of, gosh, since forever. Like, I feel like we were hearing about this in Hurricane Katrina in 2005, how people didn't get payouts for this, and I just feel a lot for these people because this is their primary home, right? These aren't like fans. Some of them are vacation rentals, don't get me wrong, but for a lot of these people, this is their primary home, and this is where they live. So I sense a lot of frustration. I sense a lot of maybe not anger, but annoyance with just kind of how things were going. So we'll see how things go, like, in the next couple months. But yeah, they're still struggling, but I should say, it's not like you go there and like it's sad or anything. It's still gorgeous. Oh my gosh, it's still beautiful. It's still like the wind and the smell of the marsh and the birds and everything. It's beautiful. So, like, I I don't know. As a Florida girl myself, it's like, yeah, of course I want to stay.
All right.
It's
Well,
beautiful.
let me ask you a question. I mean, I have ties in North Carolina, so I kind of follow what's happening there. And right now in that whole Asheville area in southwestern North Carolina, where Helene really created devastating floods, and the Biden administration was accused during the election last year of abandoning folks there. The tables have turned where Roy Cooper, the former governor of North Carolina, who's running for the U.S. Senate seat next year, is making a campaign issue of the fact that that area has not, that the Trump administration and the Republicans in North Carolina have not helped out to get all of Asheville, that whole greater Asheville area, back on their feet. Do you sense that what you got in that area when you were visiting the places impacted by Helene? Did you get this sense that it's a humanitarian issue, but not yet a political issue, or are people starting to point fingers at government and the DeSantis or Trump for not coming in and helping out? What's your sense? Is it humanitarian, or is it also political going to happen here?
So there's still Gulf of America stuff everywhere. There's still Trump flags. I will say that. But when you talk to people, I'm like, hey, has anyone come and check on you? Have have your representatives, have your legislators, has the governor come and checked on you? And they say, no, we haven't seen him in a year. In the immediate aftermath of the storm, everyone came down to check in, shake people's hands, give people hugs. And then they say, we haven't seen them. They came to hear our stories and they left. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that people don't give them credit, right? Like, I spoke to one woman who said that Representative Jason Schoaf of Port St. Joe, and then Senator Corey Simon of Tallahassee, both Republican, they really made an effort to try to get the waterways clear, which is awesome, because when you went there last year, it's like the canal was just basically just a trash ditch. Like, it was full of just debris.
Mhm.
And it still is. There still is debris. There's still stuff everywhere. There's still I think our photographer, she took a picture of an upside down chair last year, like hung up on a palm tree, a rocking chair, and it's still there in the exact same place. The palm tree's kind of dead, but the chair is still there, and also just like really sun bleached because it's been out there. Um,
Right, so
but
maybe
yeah,
the chair, yeah,
yeah.
maybe the chair becomes the symbol here going forward. But anyway, look, that's about all the time we have for this week's edition. I want to thank Anna and John and Stephany for joining us, and also want to thank our production guru Rob Landers and everyone in the USA Today Florida network whose work we depend on to put this show together. That's it for this show. See you next time.